We're now at a site called Grasshopper Point. We're within Oak Creek Canyon, and Oak Creek is just back there where the sycamore trees are. It's you may be able to hear the running water. There's also wind. The red rocks of Sedona have traditionally been referred to as supai, to correlate them with the red rocks in the middle of the Grand Canyon, Pennsylvania Permian supai formation, then subdivided into formations that made it the supai group. The supai in the Grand Canyon has been assigned to 4 formations: Wattahamagie, Manicacha, Wescogamy, and Esplanade. Ed McKee of the USGS and other places did that work. When he came to Oak Creek, he called it supai, but he didn't feel comfortable enough that these rocks matched the rocks in the Grand Canyon to apply those names here. And so what he did instead, he just assigned it to supai A, B, and C. And we can see all of those 3 units from here. The cliff at the top, we're seeing the very bottom of the sandy A unit. This slope in here with the slope and ledges, that's B. And the light colored calcareous sandstones in here, that's supai C. So there's A, B, and C. And that terminology has been used for a long time. One of the issues in here is that since you have a hard time correlating this to the Grand Canyon, what names do you use in here? Some people think, and based on a lot of study, that these slope-forming rocks in the middle is actually equivalent to the Hermit Formation, and so they've used the name Hermit in here. I'm not a big fan of that, but it's widely used. If you read material about Oak Creek Canyon, you'll commonly see that referenced as Hermit. We're a long way from the Grand Canyon. The Hermit is thinning in this direction, and so it has to change its thinning direction to have this much Hermit be here. And there's also some issues about the age of these rocks, and are they the same age as the Hermit, and things like that. So the people that want to use the name Hermit in here, like Ron Blakey, they recognized if this is Hermit, then supai is only the stuff below you, because in the Grand Canyon you have the Hermit and you have the supai. And then anything above the Hermit cannot be supai, because it's physically above the Hermit Formation. And so he proposed a new name, the Schnebly Hill Formation, named for Schnebly Hill, which is that way. And a lot of people in this area use those names. They use Hermit and Schnebly Hill. Other people don't like that correlation. Another group worked in here and they said, oh, we found Hermit, but they found Hermit way the heck up in A. Another guy that worked in here for the Arizona survey thought, from correlating these rocks to those rocks further east, that this was much older than Hermit should be. And so he did not want to use the name Hermit in here. And that's an unresolved problem. There's still a controversy about what you do in here. We're trying to do some work with fossils and detrital zircons to try to answer some of this question. In here, we came in to do detrital zircons. So what we're doing is taking sandstones, grinding them apart, and getting the uranium lead ages of individual zircons or spots in zircons. And so we collected rocks in C, we collected rocks at the bottom and top of B, and we collected rocks at the bottom and most of the way up A. Those data are permissible with this being Hermit, but just barely. The thing that's interesting is in the Grand Canyon, when we talked about these rocks for decades, we always said these red clastic rocks came from an ancestral mountain range, mostly in Colorado and Utah, to some extent in northeastern Arizona, called the Ancestral Rockies. And that's a Pennsylvania Permian mountain range. People think it's more or less related to the collision of Africa and South America with North America. And so the assumption for years was that all this red detritus came off the Ancestral Rockies. The Ancestral Rockies has a bunch of rocks in it that are 1.7 billion, 1.4 billion, and that's about it. When people came in and started looking at the Grand Canyon and doing detrital zircon work, what they found out, there was a whole bunch of 1 billion-year-old zircons in here, which is Grenville age, not very common out here, but really common in the eastern coast, the eastern US. And also there were like 500 million year old zircons, 450 million year old zircons here. And we don't have any of those rocks around. The ancestral Rockies don't have any of those rocks, but the Appalachians have a ton of those rocks. And so the big implication of the first detrital zircon studies that were done by Bill Dickinson and George Garrels was that there was a bunch of ancestral rocky sediment in here, but there was even more sediment that had come off the Appalachians and had to be transported across nearly the entire continent into here to get those sediments in here to Western North America, southwestern North America, where we are here. So in the Grand Canyon, there's a detrital zircon influx of about 500 million year old zircons at the Hermit. And below that, it's mostly 1 billion. So in here, we see an influx of 500 million year old zircons, but it's a little higher up the section. And so right now, I'd say it's still a little dodgy whether this could be Hermit or not Hermit. We're still looking at that. We're going to do a study of paleontology the next canyon over, Fossil Creek, and see if we can't use fossils to constrain this section a little better. One of the things about this section that's Supai B, and I'll just use that terminology, is there are conglomerates in there. And when you track this interval with the conglomerates to the east, it has fossils in it that are really low in the Permian or are the Pennsylvanian Permian boundary. And that's not permissible to be Hermit. So there's a conflict here between the stratigraphic evidence where people tried to bring the stratigraphy in from the Grand Canyon versus the paleontology evidence and perhaps the detrital zircon evidence. We're still trying to resolve all that. One of the interesting things about that whole scenario of all this material coming from the Appalachians is remember what the Appalachian Mountains represent. They represent a collisional mountain belt, not between the subcontinent of India and the rest of Asia. It's a collisional mountain belt between North America, Africa, and South America. So it's a huge continental collision. And so you likely made a really big mountain belt. And now that mountain belt has a bunch of metamorphic rocks sitting at the surface of the Appalachians. And so all that material that was on top of those metamorphic rocks had to get stripped off and go somewhere. And so it was presumably transported west along big rivers and then transported, south and north by ocean currents, winds, things like that can move sediment up and down the coast.